Thank you. That's a big Divas Club welcome. I like that.
We're a good group.
Okay, well, we'll find out. I'm not so sure.
Except for maybe two of us.
There you go.
I like how Gary's got his own section up here. That's awesome. All right.
Yes, they get away from me as far as.
All the questions come from him.
Oh, is that what he's ready?
Or Dorothy.
Again.
Yeah, there they
All
are.
right, here we go. So I've got a question for you, and you're the only one that knows the answer to this question. Nobody else knows. The question is, whenever you hear the question, someone asks you the question, are you saved? Are you saved? What comes to your mind?
Baptist.
The Baptist.
The Baptist, okay.
Billy Graham.
Okay, we got the Baptist.
I was asked that by a Baptist, and she said, "Are you saved?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "When?" I said, "In the year 33 A.D." And she said,
You said basically it was the cross. The cross
when
saved
Jesus
you.
died on the cross for my sins, and that just knocked the socks right off. She
Okay.
didn't know what to say then.
All right. Did you think you were alive back then? Or-
He's fake smart.
No, I guess-
She'll tell you she's older than dirt.
Yeah. So anything else? So we got some Baptists, so people that come to you to ask you. Sounds like some people are coming and asking you questions. They kind of have an expected response from you. Is that what's going on for the most part? All right. Good. I just wanted to understand the whole question: are you saved? Where is it coming from for you? So if we're going to be saved, what are we being saved from? So we know that ultimately we have two destinations. We have heaven, which means that we're living with God for all eternity in heaven, or hell, which means we're away from God for all eternity. Now, so whenever people use the word saved, I think they normally mean that they are in heaven. If they're saved, they're in heaven and they're living with God for all eternity. I think that's what most people are referring to when they use the word saved. So so at least for the purpose of this discussion that we have for the next, however many minutes, let's say that being saved means that we have received salvation by going to be with God in heaven for all eternity. Does anybody have a problem with that kind of definition?
No.
All right. It's about relationship. I think sometimes it's possible for some people to get confused about some rules that you follow and things that you do, a mechanical kind of thing, compared to a relationship. So whenever we're in right relationship, like if, like I don't have a relationship with Gary right now, like if we have a little bit of an acquaintance, let's say, a very brief budding relationship. And it could be that over time, Gary and I come closer together as we learn about each other. And so then the more that we are able to share good things with each other, the more we're in a better relationship. And I think that it could be at some point, something I could sin against Gary. That's an option that I have. And at which point our relationship could become broken. It could have a problem. We could have a problem with our relationship. So salvation really is talking about being in right relationship with God. And so what we're trying to do here on earth is to make sure that our relationship with God is good so that we can receive an invitation from God. God would know that it's good for us to be in heaven, and that we would have the disposition to accept that invitation. It is totally the case that some people will not like heaven. That is true. That is the truth. Some people will not like heaven because when you're in heaven, it's not your way. It's not your way. You don't get everything your way, right? We're talking like the conversation that was up here before. We have people, obviously we're living in this world where people are harming other people. Some people do this and that harms them. And other people do this and that harms them. And there's a lot of things going on. Heaven is going to be everybody. that, that you might not like, that have done really bad things. They're gonna be there. You might not want to be there with those people, right? Hell is this place where you're disconnected from people. Right?
I am a little confused. Shouldn't the question be, if you're in a relationship with God, shouldn't it be, are you being saved? Because it's
So
continuous.
you're saying, does the question, are you saved?
Yeah, it's like a past tense.
Yeah, well,
thing.
that is unfortunate that, whenever someone says, have you been saved? It is as if this thing happened in the past and there's no future to it, right? That's really, we'll get into more of that here in a little while. But really, relationships aren't like that. You don't know of any relationship that's this thing that happened in the past. You wouldn't say that, like even people that I know in high school, I wouldn't say that, the relationship is gone. I expect to, if they go to heaven, if God willing, I go to heaven, I expect to be able to interact with them. And that relationship would continue. There would be something there to continue. And so relationships are things that are continuous, and our relationship with God is, we're on a journey, really, honestly. I mean, the reason why you guys are here, you're trying to learn and come closer to God and learn more about God and get closer and maybe look for things in your own life that you're trying to change.
This sounds very much what she's bringing up. I was a Baptist and converted when I was 63. Didn't get into a lot of their theology, but there was a great deal of discussion about once saved, always saved versus backsliding. And it sounds to me like, if I understood it correctly, and I probably didn't, is backsliding is that you have fallen out of grace and that you're no longer saved. And others are saying that's impossible because once you've been saved, you're always saved.
Right.
So, how does that fit? Does that even fit into Catholic
Well, I guess
theology?
the Catholic theology is at odds with the once saved, always saved thing. And the once saved, always saved thing is at odds with just relationship in general, just the basic, freedom, the freedom. That would say that if you were saved in the past and later on you decide, I don't really like God, I don't want to follow his rules forever, for all eternity, I want to do things my way, you don't have the freedom to get away from God at that point. So there's a lot of things that are at odds with the once saved, always saved theology. I want to go to this next thing. I think we're, so this next slide, I just want to make sure. All right. I want to do a little thought experiment. All right, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to design a video. I have a video I want to make. I'll put this next slide up here in a second. But there's this guy, lives in a big mansion, has a huge mansion, very wealthy, and he's got a couple of kids that are adults that live with him. His adult children live with him. And he's got this rule that if he's away from his big mansion, he doesn't trust other people coming into his mansion. So he says, you just can't have visitors while I'm away. That's his big rule that he has for his mansion. So I'll go to this next slide here. So I want to design this scene in a short video where you got the wealthy father. The father comes home unexpectedly. There's a big old party in his mansion. And so then, as a consequence of that, the father decides to disown his children. And I would like to, like in video, you don't just say, and the father disowned his children. You show it. You use the ability to bring in, wonderful scenery and things like that. So I would like to ask you, if you were watching a video and you were going to have something depicted to you of being disowned in this situation, what would really speak to you? You're the only ones that are going to know this answer. What would speak to you is if you're watching a video and you're seeing a father, you're seeing it played out, a father disowning his children, what would that look like to you?
And throwing you out of the house and saying, do not come back any longer.
So you
Close
basically
the
kick
door.
him out of
Close
the
the
house
door.
and then close the door.
Changing his will.
Okay, so you could have a situation where he's like thoughtfully, writing, that would be, that's one, the writing thing would be kind of like saying, I agree that the changing of the will, you could have like a big will that he would tear up or something. That might be something that you could use it graphically, but certainly you could tell the kids are leaving, they're not happy about it, and shut the door and never come back kind of thing. You'd have to do something probably to show that you're not just sending them away on a vacation, you know, and expecting them to come back, versus do something to kind of make it so they really can't ever come back. What's that? Ron?
I think that the story about the 10 women, the 5 good ones and the 5 that were not good and didn't have oil, scares me to death a lot of times.
Okay.
Because they were not prepared. And he
Right.
closed the door and said, "Get away from me because I don't know you."
Yeah, they weren't happy. They were basically showing some displeasure with the consequences that they were suffering there, weren't they? All right. Anything else come to mind? Yes, go ahead.
I would think that after the father closed the door on his 2 sons, that his heart would be broken.
Probably.
Yeah, I guess so. He probably loves his kids. It's not like, it's basic, see, the thing is, you could say, well, let's say he does love his kids, right? Is it really in the children's best interest to give them access to this big mansion while he's not around, right?
Well, that
Is that
would be
really
good.
is that in their interest? Because they're using that as a tool to do things that are not good, right? So by sending them out, it could actually be for their own benefit. You see what I'm saying?
I would question why adult children are still living with him.
Yeah.
They were living in the basement.
Yeah, the thing is, like, it's a big,
It's a
wonderful
big
mansion,
mansion.
right? A really big, you got the pool, you got the, all right, so anyway, how are we doing here?
Some parents want control though, that their children are living there, and they would have control.
All right, so this, I'm sure some of you guys see where this is going. We got Adam and Eve and the fall, right? The depiction that we have of Adam and Eve in the fall is almost exactly like what you were saying, where you kick the kids out, you lock the door, and they can't come back in. It's the same. And so here we got this picture of Adam and Eve with their clothes that God has given them, and there's this big sword, scary sword. So they're not going to be able to get back through that. They're kind of done, and they're out of the garden at that point. And I want to, so the reason why I do that video thing is that there's definitely some confusion about original sin. So people think, I think a lot of people, too many people think, that original sin is this thing that you're born with that's like stuck to you, right? You're like, okay, I'd like you to just like, you can have it back, I don't want it, take it off. Okay, that's not original sin. Original sin is about this thing that we lost, okay? It's more of a hole than an extra thing stuck to you, okay? And so this depiction of them getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden is a loss. So the thing is that, like, going back to this video we were talking about, the kids get disowned, right? They have their kids. Do they get to pass on anything from their father to their kids?
No.
No.
It's like the will being torn up, the covenant was destroyed.
Right, so they don't have the ability to pass on what they had. And that is what is going on with Adam and Eve and getting kicked out of the garden and being told they can't come back in. That is what's happening. It's a deprivation. It is not this thing that got stuck to them, like they were a white piece of cloth, and then some black stuff got poured on it. That is not what original sin is. So when you were born with a nice clean soul, but you had something missing, and it was this inheritance that was lost.
But they always say born with original sin, so that's, I think that.
Yeah, it is. Right, so the thing is, original sin is something that, like if you have a hole, you're born with a hole, you're born with a loss, a deprivation. You're born with a deprivation. You're not born with an extra thing stuck to you, okay? And that is what is going on with original sin.
So then with baptism, I mean, we're always taught that baptism takes away the original sin. So,
Right.
are you saying that it just closes the hole, or?
No.
Right, so so what it does, what baptism will do,
It fills the hole.
is it fills the hole, right?
Okay.
And the idea is that you're now an adopted child of God. You're an adopted child of God. And the baptism is where you go back and you're able to get back to this Garden of Eden where you have this relationship with God that is restored. So this whole idea, like the cross is why we have baptism. And baptism is why we have our relationships restored. Go ahead, Dorothy.
Robert, the nuns taught us, they're never wrong. That you were born with the stain of immortal sin on your soul, and you had to be baptized to be clear of that sin, and if you were not ever baptized, to remove that mortal sin, you would never go to heaven.
Well,
That is how we were taught.
right.
back in
I think
the
I think I'm saying the same. I think so the thing is, whenever they say the stain of original sin, I think it's unfortunate that language is there because it's really, the original sin is a deprivation. It's not an extra thing that you've got. It is a deprivation. So, but almost everything they're saying is exactly what I'm saying. If you want to have this relationship with God restored, you want to have the whole that was created here at the fall. You want to have that whole restored, and that baptism is about being in relationship. So whenever we say, like one of the things that happens in the baptismal rite is the child gets baptized, and then we say the Our Father. Our Father. Amazing, ridiculously over the top words, right? Those two words together, Our Father. So all of us are children of God. We're all children, the same family of God, and it's through baptism. And so we say the Our Father after baptism because now the baptized are able to say they're now adopted children of God just like we are. Elaine?
Except, I'm now confused because we still have a tendency to sin.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't think originally Adam and Eve had
That's totally
a
true too.
tendency
That is totally true.
to sin.
We're going to get to that. But,
Okay.
that's the difference between, I think, being the adopted child of God, because it says, like, in the Bible says, like, we're adopted children of God, and sometimes we'll just say children of God, but we're adopted children of God, so there are things that, there's still some consequences of the fall that we have to deal with, but our relationship with God has been restored, and the original sin that we have, that deprivation is now gone.
I had in my head another or slightly different analogy about going with the tearing up of the wills, that what a lot of parents who disown their children would do, they would write their grandchildren back into the will, which is, back into their inheritance, which is kind of what I see the analogy of being done whenever we are baptized, we're being written back. But then we have the issue with when Jesus died on the cross, that established a new covenant. And as I understood it, that covenant was basically where God said, you're all back to where Adam and Eve were at the beginning. So now you're all good until you do something wrong.
Well, there you go.
Bad enough.
Well, there you go. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, so there's this thing called concupiscence. So
The what?
concupiscence. So the thing is that everybody, unfortunately, I'm going to talk about this. So Adam and Eve did not have what we call the tendency to sin. So right now I'm doing a lot of remodeling in my house, okay? And if I were to lock up the doors and walk away, all the dust settles on the floor, everywhere. All the dust, all the drywall dust is everywhere. But anyway, whenever we're working with it, the dust is like in the air. But see, the thing is, if left to itself, dust will just settle. Now, for ourselves, like, I don't need to practice to be selfish, okay? Or greedy. I don't have to practice that, right? I mean, it's like, it comes very naturally to do the things that what we would call vice. And we have all these, we have these opposing things, a vice with an opposing virtue. It takes work for us, at least for most people. It takes work for me, I'll just say that. Maybe I'm the only one, but it takes work to be generous. In a lot of, it's something to practice. You have to practice to be generous, and if you give up practicing it, and you just stop putting energy into it, you're gonna just slowly drift down, and then selfishness will just be a natural consequence of that. And that is, the concupiscence, that is something that we lost. It does not get restored with baptism. We have our relationship with God restored, we're adopted children of God, but that aspect of who we, having this natural inclination to sin.
Innocence.
The pure innocence, it's kind of interesting. I got my grandkids here, and you can see as they grow up, at first, they're just little babies, but eventually, you kind of made the choice to do something that wasn't so great. It was very interesting to watch to kind of see that, and this is the aspect of the human condition that we have now. So that is something that Adam and Eve did not have. They had to, it wasn't like, hey, I just want this because, the tendency that they had, they didn't have a tendency to just want to go get stuff that wasn't theirs. It really didn't even occur to them until the devil goes, hey, go check this out over here. So that's something that was lost, and we do not get that back with baptism. Anything else? Question? No? Okay. So we go from Adam and Eve, all the way. Okay, we got some time here. We got to the cross, right? There's this long road. So basically, you talked about, okay, we want to try to get the grandkids back in, right? Okay, my kids, they messed up. Let's try to keep working this. We're going to keep working this. So God pushed Adam and Eve out of the garden, and really, just like you said, the Father still loved his children as he kicked them out. This is something that was intended, ultimately in the grand scheme of things for their benefit, right? Because it was not good for them to be in that environment where everything was cared for, because they were not, Adam wasn't really doing what he was supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be protecting, and he wasn't doing it. So the thing is that was an environment that was not good for them, and so they got kicked out. And there was this whole process. We had the flood, right? The flood comes along, Noah. And that flood is there to kind of prefigure baptism. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then we've got Abraham. He's got this crazy thing where he's 100 years old. He has a kid. God tells him to go kill the kid, and he actually makes the choice to do that. And it's kind of weird. We still don't know where this is going. And then you've got Israel coming through, and then ultimately all these covenants that you talked about are along the way, right? And then eventually we end up at the cross with Jesus. Jesus, the incarnation, God himself, the Son of God, becomes man, and then he is crucified. And so all of the graces that we have for baptism come through the cross. So we have the bride of Christ, which mystically subsists in the Catholic Church. And it's the normative means that God gives us for salvation. Okay, so one thing that you've probably heard before is that the crucifixion was the scene of a wedding, right? So you have, like in the Jewish time period, the men getting married, they wore a crown. The emperor there at the time did not like people wearing crowns, but there was one exception. If you were getting married that day, you could wear a crown. If the priest wore the seamless garment, and so people couldn't wear the seamless garment unless you were a Jewish priest. But that one day where you were getting married, you could wear the seamless garment. And then the Adam and Eve story, where Adam has this wound in his side, and out of that we have Eve, so you have side by side Eve getting there. You have the wound in the side of Christ, how that pours the blood and the water. That was not like just an anatomical detail that someone like, oh, that's interesting, water and blood. No, it was like the water and blood that flows forth is symbolizing the baptisms of water, and the blood that covers our sin coming out of Jesus. And so there's some other things that go into that. The whole process that you can see in the scriptures match that three-step process that Jewish people had back then, where they would the whole three-step process that Jewish people had, right? Where there was the whole, for example, you guys, am I boring you guys? So the thing is that if you, like, let's say I was going to get married to Dorothy, okay? And what I would do is I would have a glass with wine in it, and I would give it to Dorothy, okay? And if she took the glass and drank from it and gave it back, and then, I would drink from it, and then that would be that we are now betrothed. So that means like if we weren't married, right, but we were betrothed, so that was that first step in this three-step process. And the idea with that would be that the next step would be that I would have to go pay a price, okay? Because basically Dorothy's living at her dad's house, and I gotta go and earn something, gotta go pay a price, so that I could then be married to Dorothy.
Oh, you'd pay that price for a long time.
And then,
That's a lot of money.
and then after that, we would be married. We would then be together. And so, like Adam and Eve, right? We had Adam and Eve. We had Adam and had Eve, and the two of them are the same. Like they're both human, right? Well, Jesus has a bride, the bride of Christ, right? And it's the church. And so the church is like Jesus. And so out of this crucifixion where Jesus goes to sleep, right? He dies on the cross. Adam was put to sleep whenever he had his wound. Jesus is asleep. This wound enters his side, and then out of that comes our church. And so then Jesus comes back after paying the price, and he is there with his church. He sees them in the upper room, and he is giving them graces, right? He's breathing on them the Holy Spirit. And that's essentially where we have the church in its beginning, and it's started up from there. So there is this marriage that's taking place at the crucifixion. The crucifixion is a lot of things, okay? It's also a marriage. It's just amazing to me how many things intersect so perfectly at the intersection, at that crucifixion. And that is one of those things, is that is where this marriage is taking place. And so, for example, every time you go to receive the precious blood, you're walking under the blood of Christ, and you take that chalice, and you drink from it, and you give it back, right? That is you saying, I am committed to Christ, and I am not leaving him. That is that kind of that betrothal thing that's going on in this time of Jesus. And I think you'll remember that the very last thing that Jesus does, he takes that drink of that sour wine, and then he says, it is finished. And so that is there's this Passover element to it, but there's also that aspect of this sharing of the chalice.
So from the time that Adam and Eve walked out of paradise to the time that Jesus died on the cross, there was no marriage between, there's no betrothal. So what happened to all those people?
Why do you say that there was no marriage before, after they walked out?
You think this is just a formality when Christ died?
Well, okay, so let's, so this is an interesting thing, right? I think so we have 7 sacraments in the church, and one of them is not due to the fall. The other 6 are. The whole baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, reconciliation, anointing of the sick, and holy orders, those other 6 are due to the fall, right? They're the restorative healing part. Marriage was there before the fall. And so it is and also in the Catholic Church, marriage looks very different than all the other sacraments. You have the 2 people that are the ministers of the sacrament. It's not like the priest or deacon is the minister of a marriage. It's the 2 people that are getting married. Those are the actual ministers. It's a very different sacrament. And so marriage has existed prior through that. Now there's a difference that the Catholic Church draws a distinction now. Whenever 2 baptized people are married, this becomes a sacramental marriage. That was not available to Adam it wasn't available to them after the fall, and so all those marriages, what we call a natural marriage, but they were still a marriage.
I think I'm a little bit confused because when Christ died, you said that the church is the bride of Christ, right?
Mhm.
Became formally the bride of Christ at that point.
Yep.
So what I'm saying, I'm not talking about marriage between people, I'm talking about the marriage of Christ
Oh,
with
okay.
the church.
Oh, sorry.
So what happened, from the time that Adam and Eve left paradise to the time that Jesus died, there was not this marriage church with Christ.
Right. So we did not have available to, the people that were back then, it was very unfortunate for them, right? Because they did not have available to them the amazing things that are available to you. I mean, you guys probably either went to Mass or you're going to Mass today. That's amazingly wonderful stuff that's available to us, that stuff. But it's this relationship to God is totally different. The people that lived back then, they didn't have these gifts of the Holy Spirit. They did not have the sacraments. And whenever they died, they went down to what they called back then hell. That's why when he said God, Jesus descended into hell. Unfortunately today, hell means the place of the damned. Back, up until about the year 300, what hell really meant was the place of the dead. And so you had people there that were waiting for Christ to proclaim the good news. So when Christ died, he went down to the place of the dead, and there were people there that were waiting, and he proclaimed the good news to them. And then, essentially, the way death was destroyed is Christ entered into it. He broke death, and people followed him out of that. That's why we call it the way, right? So Jesus is the way. And so we're going to follow Christ out of death that way. So does that make sense, or does that help at all, or is that?
Yeah, but I'm just,
It sounds like you're being retroactive, is what he meant.
Well, the people died, they went to the place of the dead. That is, and so there was like and so people that died in God's friendship waited for for Jesus to proclaim the good news to them. They were waiting.
It also seems like it perhaps a different concept of time, our time and.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
There are people who believe in God, but they do not believe that Jesus is their Savior, Lord and Redeemer. Will not accept him, do not follow in his ways. Will they go to heaven?
So we can't, I guess the church always is pretty quick to pump their brakes on some of declaring the person's going to heaven, this person's going to hell, because truly we don't really know, if someone truly knows Jesus, they really know Jesus, and they really know, I don't want that, okay, then they're not going to enjoy heaven, right? They're going to say, I would rather be away from that. You see what I'm saying? It's in their, that's just how they would not want it. But there are people, I know, there's a guy I worked with that he said he was an atheist. He said he didn't believe in God, right? He said it, right? But the thing is, his behavior and the way he treated people and his wife, really quick story. This is a fun story for me. Some of you dated mass people may have heard this already, but the thing is, he is in a bike race, really short version. He's in a bike race, okay, but he was really pressed for time because he had to finish the bike race, he had to get his kids, and then, because his wife was going to go on this very special, had this very special event. If she wasn't there on time, for some reason, like a train ride or something, if she wasn't there on time, she would miss it. It was a bunch of her friends, been looking forward to it for a long time. So time was a big factor, but he crashed his bike right at the end of the race, and he needed medical attention. Okay, he had to get, and so the thing is, he very quickly somehow got himself to one of these little minor emergency rooms, and the doctor just happened to be waiting there, ready for him. So he goes in there, looks at him, and so he says, "Look, I've got 15 minutes. Can you stitch me up?" And the doctor said, "Well, it's going to take longer than that just to do the anesthesia." He goes, "Well, what happens if you don't do anesthesia? What if you just sew it up right now?" And so that's going to hurt, but I could get it done, So he has all these stitches right there, and then he gets his kids, she makes it to her event. So the thing is, that's sacrificial, giving right there. And the thing is, I asked him about a couple of years later, because I was kind of curious. I just was ringing in my ears one time, And asked him a couple of years later, did you ever tell your wife? You know, did you tell your wife about that? No, didn't ever tell her. It never came up. I'm thinking I probably would have mentioned that maybe the other day. But yeah, so the thing is, now is he going to be offended by Jesus? Like if he finds out the reality of Jesus, Jesus is on the cross, he died, you know, for our sins and for him. I mean, he's like lives kind of that kind of life, but the Jesus that he knows is the people that have come to him and yelled at him, you're going to hell. You know, he doesn't want, it's not loving. The stuff he's had given to him is stuff that's not loving, and he's closed. You know, but the thing is that I do believe that God wills that all people be saved, right? And so he's I'm gonna guess, Jesus is like, look, you know, you kind of got, you know, something that didn't kind of happen right here. He's, you know, I would think that there's at least a chance for him, but I don't know. See, the thing is that if you take it out of the world of relationship, if you take this idea of salvation out of the world of relationship, okay, and you go into this mechanical thing, do this, do this, do this, and it's no longer about being, you know, being in a relationship, but it's just a mechanical thing, then I think we can get confused about like, well, what is going to heaven? What is going to hell, right? Is it really like getting this ticket so I can get in the door, you know? Or is it like, hey, I did all these steps. I'm here at the door of heaven. Bam! You know, let me in. Well, that is not a relationship. So I think that is this whole aspect of Christ and the church and the sacraments. It's all about us. God is just asking us, be in relationship with me. So anyway, that's how I would answer that. Sorry, but I mean, it doesn't sound like it was very satisfying. But
My idea of heaven is that everything is perfect.
okay.
So,
And you'll be there. I'll be there.
but we won't have, I mean, you won't need to make a choice because it's all perfect to you. So there would be nothing you would dislike.
So the thing is that you would have to choose to like what's there, though. You'd have to choose to like
But
it.
if it's perfect,